Welcome. I'm Carolyn Waters, head librarian of the New York Society Library, the oldest library and cultural institution in New York City. We are so honored to present this third event in our Black Literature Matters series, exploring the works of African-American writers over the centuries. Tonight's program will focus on the period 1900 to 1959, and will follow a roughly chronological format. As in our previous two programs, the works will be read by actors Geoffrey D. Williams and Shontelle Thrash. Dramatic readings by these two incredible actors made the works of our 1700s and 1800s programs truly accessible. And tonight we have a special treat, archival audio recordings of some of the writers themselves. You will hear the recorded voices of W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, Claude McKay, Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Dorothy West, Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, Gwendolyn Brooks, Paule Marshall, Lorraine Hansberry, James Baldwin, and LeRoi Jones, as he was known in the 1950s before becoming Amiri Baraka. Our first two programs showed that in the 1700s, most Black writers were enslaved. Fewer than a dozen published works of Black authors of that century still exist. In our 1800s program, we discussed that the work of many, many Black writers, men and increasingly women, still survives. In newspapers, pamphlets, broadsides, and books, these writers attracted a widespread reading public on slavery, suffrage, literacy, and the issues of the day. And as we also showed in our prior programs, our library, founded in 1754, and other membership libraries of the time and after, played a role in the dissemination of these works to a larger audience. The New York Public Library was founded much, much later, in 1895. At the turn of the century, the New York Society Library was located at University Place, and our collection housed approximately 100,000 volumes in our collection. And as reported in the New York Times, despite overtures from the public library to merge, the trustees of the Society Library were staunchly opposed to the idea, indicating that, and I quote, "They would be ready to fight the consolidation scheme hotly if it should ever come to a crucial point." So New York City's oldest library carried on independently, eventually moving in 1937 to our current home here at 53 East 79th Street between Park and Madison Avenues. The library is still, to this day, an independent subscription library open to all who want to join. And joining me again on the program is Dr. Farah Griffin from Columbia University. Dr. Griffin is the inaugural chair of the African American and African Diaspora Studies Department at Columbia, where she is also professor of English and comparative literature. Hi, Farah.
Hi, Carolyn. Good to see you. Thank you all for being here with us this evening again for this next installment of our series. With this evening's program, we turn to the 20th century. And during this period, African-American writers come fully into their own, building upon the past, but creating innovative new ways to address both the political and the aesthetic concerns of their present moment. At the turn of the century, through the mid-1950s, these authors are still writing in the context of a racially segregated society. The Plessy v. Ferguson decision of 1896, which upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation under the separate but equal doctrine, would not be overturned until 1954's Brown versus Board of Education. So from Paul Laurence Dunbar, whose novel Sport of the Gods was published in 1902, to the great innovators of the 1950s like Ralph Ellison, Gwendolyn Brooks, and James Baldwin, all wrote under the shadow of Jim Crow. During this era, the migration narrative would become a dominant but not only form of African-American writing, and Black writers would contribute greatly to the project of American literary modernism. In all of these works, we get more complex portrayals of Black life and the representation of a wider range of characters and communities. By the end of the 1950s, Black authors start to explore the true meaning of freedom and possibility for Black Americans, but they never lose sight of history as they begin to project notions of a more viable future in their natal land. As Carolyn noted, this evening's program includes audio recordings of many of the authors reading their own words, in addition to the dramatic readings of our two incredible actors who brought the works of the 18th and 19th centuries to life. The novels, Sport of the Gods by Paul Laurence Dunbar and The Marrow of Tradition by Charles Chesnutt open the century with compelling narratives that examine the challenges faced by African Americans in the postbellum era. Our first excerpt is from Sport of the Gods, published in 1902, just before the Great Migration. It's Dunbar's last novel. Taken from chapter 5, The Justice of Men, this piece addressed the issue of migration from the rural South to the urban North. Note that the mention of the 60s means the 1860s, referring to a period when Black Americans were enslaved.
In the Black people of the town, the strong influence of slavery was still operative, and with one accord they turned away from one of their own kind upon whom had been set the ban of the white people's displeasure. If they had sympathy, they dared not show it. Their own interests, the safety of their own positions and firesides, demanded they stand aloof from the criminal. Not then, not now, nor has it ever been true, although it has been claimed that Negroes either harbor or sympathize with the criminal of their kind. They did not dare do it before the 60s. They do not dare do it now. They have brought down as a heritage from the days of their bondage both fear and disloyalty. So Berry was unbefriended while the storm raged around him. The cell where they had placed him was kind to him, and he could not hear the envious and sneering comments that went on about him. This was kind, for their tongues of the enemies were not.
Charles Chesnutt was America's most critically acclaimed and widely read Black writer. The Marrow of Tradition, published in 1901, is Chesnutt's fictional account of the Wilmington, North Carolina insurrection of 1898. The novel documents the white supremacist destructive and deadly coup that expelled the legitimately elected local officials, both Black and white citizens. The vigilante action was a successful removal and replacement of elected officials by unelected individuals. This section introduces Josh Green, one of the first Black vigilante characters in African American fiction.
Josh was evidently in dead earnest. Miller recalled very vividly the expression he had seen twice on his patient's face during the journey to Wellington. He had often seen Josh's mother, old Aunt Millie, Silly Millie the children called her, wandering aimlessly about the street, muttering to herself incoherently. He had felt a certain childish awe at the sight of one of God's creatures who had lost the light of reason, and he had always vaguely understood that she was the victim of human cruelty, though he had dated it farther back into the past. This was his first knowledge of the real facts of the case. He realized, too, for a moment, the continuity of life, how inseparably the present is woven with the past, and how certainly the future will be but the outcome of the present. He had supposed this old wound healed. The Negroes were not a vindictive people. If swayed by passion or emotion, they sometimes gave way to gusts of rage. These were of brief duration. Absorbed in the contemplation of their doubtful present and their uncertain future, they gave little thought to the past. It was a dark story, which they would willingly forget. He knew the time-worn explanation that the Ku Klux movement in the main was merely an ebullition of boyish spirits, begun to amuse young white men by playing upon the fears of superstitions of ignorant Negroes. Here, however, was its tragic side. The old wound still bleeding, the fruit of one tragedy, the seed of another. He could not approve of Josh's application of the Mosaic law of revenge, and yet the incident was not without significance. Here was a Negro who could remember an injury, who could shape his life into a definite purpose, if not a high and holy one. When his race reached the point where they would resent a wrong, there was hope that they might soon attain the stage where they would try, and if need be, die to defend a right. This man, too, had a purpose in life and was willing to die that he might accomplish it. Miller was willing to give up his life to a cause. Would he be equally willing, he asked himself, to die for it? Miller had no prophetic instinct to tell him how soon he would have the opportunity to answer his own question, but he could not encourage Josh to carry out this dark and revengeful purpose. Every worthy consideration required him to dissuade his patient from such a desperate course. "You had better put away these murderous fancies, Josh," he said seriously. "The Bible says that we should forgive our enemies, bless them that curse us, and do good to them that despitefully use us." "Ah, yes, sir. I've learned all that in Sunday school, and I've heard the preacher say it time and time again. But it appears to me that this forgetfulness and forgiveness is mighty one-sided. Yeah, the white folks don't forgive nothing, but we do."
Black women's voices were an important part of the literature and the growing movement for women's suffrage. Anna Julia Cooper, born in 1858, was a prominent writer, teacher, educational leader, and activist in Washington, D.C. throughout the first half of the 20th century. Here's an excerpt from The Intellectual Progress of the Colored Woman. Although published in 1893, we've included it in this program because Cooper remained an important voice during this period.
Let woman's claim be as broad in the concrete as in the abstract. We take our stand in the solidarity of humanity, the oneness of life, and the unnaturalness and injustice of all special favoritisms, whether of sex, race, country, or condition. If one link of the chain be broken, the chain is broken. A bridge is no stronger than its weakest part, and a cause is not worthier than its weakest element. Least of all can woman's cause afford to decry the weak. We want, then, as toilers for the universal triumph of justice and human rights, to go to our homes from this Congress, demanding an entrance, not through a gate for ourselves, our race, our sex, our sept, but through a grand highway for humanity. The colored woman feels that woman's cause is one and universal, and that not till the image of God, whether in Parian marble or ebony, is sacred and inviolable, not till race, color, sex, and condition are seen as the accidents and not the substance of life, not till the universal title of humanity to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is conceded to be unalienable to all. Not till then is woman's lesson taught and woman's cause won. Oh, not the white woman's, nor the black woman's, nor the red woman's, but the cause of every man and of every woman who has writhed silently under a mighty wrong. Woman's wrongs are thus indissolubly linked with all undefended woe, and the acquirement of her rights will mean the final triumph of all right over might, the supremacy of the moral forces of reason and justice and love in the government of the nations of earth.
Let's now listen to our first archival audio and hear the voice of the brilliant scholar activist, W.E.B. Du Bois.
For instance, in the United States during the young manhood of Frederick Douglass, the Negro problem was the problem of slavery. There were, of course, minor and connected problems, but they were all subjected to the main problem of human freedom. Then rather suddenly, between 1863 and 1876, the Negro problem became a problem of political enfranchisement and party government, which rapidly descended into race war, leading to temporary attempts to grapple with problems of work and education, but finally ending in practical disfranchisement of the entire Negro race in the South in 1876. From 1876 until our day, the race problem in the United States of the Negro has been primarily a struggle to regain the right to vote in the midst of caste discrimination, changing slowly but definitely to a problem of the right to work and to be trained for work at all levels, and to a struggle for broad civil and social rights. Most of you, I think, assume that this is still the Negro problem, but you must be warned that it is not wholly or mainly that now. That the reason that it is not is because of the fundamental changes now spreading over the whole world. Whereas in the 18th century the world thought that progress and emancipation were coming from popular education and universal suffrage, we know now that more fundamental than these important rights is the economic organization of the world. That is, the way in which the labor of human beings is organized to satisfy human needs.
From Du Bois's classic, The Souls of Black Folk, which was published in 1903. The first excerpt is from the foreword.
Herein lie buried many things, which if read with patience may show the strange meaning of being black here at the dawning of the 20th century. This meaning is not without interest to you, gentle reader, for the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line.
The second Du Bois excerpt is from chapter 1 of Our Spiritual Strivings.
The Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder.
Let's listen to an archival recording of novelist, poet, and songwriter James Weldon Johnson reading his poem, My City. Because of the sound quality, the words will appear on your screen.
My city. When I come down to sleep death's endless night, the threshold of the unknown dark to cross, what to me then will be the keenest loss, when this bright world blurs on my fading sight? Will it be that no more I shall see the trees, or smell the flowers, or hear the singing birds, or watch the flashing streams or patient herds? No, I am sure it will be none of these. But our Manhattan's sights and sounds, her smells, her crowds, her throbbing force, the thrill that comes from being of her a part, her subtle spells, her shining towers, her avenues, her slums. O God, the stark, unutterable pity, to be dead and never again behold my city.
Johnson's The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man, the classic novel where a Black man decides to pass for white.
I know that in writing the following pages, I am divulging the great secret of my life, the secret of which for some years I have guarded far more carefully than any of my earthly possessions. And it is a curious study to me to analyze the motives which prompt me to do it. I feel that I am led by the same impulse which forces the unfound out criminal to take somebody into confidence, although he knows that the act is likely, even almost certain, to lead to his undoing. I know that I am playing with fire, and I feel the thrill which accompanies that most fascinating pastime. And back of it all, I think I find a sort of savage and diabolical desire to gather up all the little tragedies of my life and turn them into a practical joke on society. And too, I suffer a vague feeling of unsatisfaction, of regret, of almost remorse from which I am seeking relief, and of which I shall speak in the last paragraph of this account.
Man. The word pottage at the end is a Bible reference to the soup for which the Old Testament character Esau traded his birthright.
It is to my children that I have devoted my life. I no longer have the same fear for myself of my secrets being found out, for since my wife's death, I have gradually dropped out of social life. But there is nothing I would not suffer to keep the brand from being placed upon them. It is difficult for me to analyze my feelings concerning my present position in the world. Sometimes it seems to me that I have never really been a Negro, that I have been only a privileged spectator of the inner life. At other times, I feel that I have been a coward, a deserter, and I am possessed by a strange longing for my mother's people. Several years ago, I attended the great meeting in the interest of Hampton Institute at Carnegie Hall. The Hampton students sang the old songs and awoke memories that left me sad. Among the speakers were R.C. Ogden, ex-ambassador Choate, and Mark Twain. But the greatest interest of the audience was centered in Booker T. Washington, and not because he so much surpassed the others in eloquence, but because of what he represented with so much earnestness and faith. And it is this that all of that small but gallant band of colored men who publicly fighting the cause of their race have behind them. Even those who oppose them know that these men have the eternal principles of right on their side, and they will be victors even though they should go down in defeat. Beside them, I feel small and selfish. I am an ordinarily successful white man who has made a little money. They are men who are making history and a race. I, too, might have taken part in a work so glorious. My love for my children makes me glad that I am what I am and keeps me from desiring to be otherwise. And yet, when I sometimes open a little box in which I still keep my fast yellowing manuscripts, the only tangible remnants of a vanished dream, a dead ambition, a sacrificed talent, I cannot repress the thought that after all, I have chosen the lesser part, that I have sold my birthright for a mess of pottage.
an important part of literature, and the following excerpt shows they were writing about issues still urgent today. Journalist, playwright, and poet Georgia Douglas Johnson was the host of the S Street Salon, an important gathering place for writers of the Harlem Renaissance, based in Washington, D.C. Her poetry explored concerns of importance to Black women during her time. This poem, Motherhood, was published in the Crisis magazine in 1922.
Don't knock on my door, little child. I cannot let you in. You know not what a world this is of cruelty and sin. Wait in the still eternity until I come to you. Oh, the world is cruel, cruel, child. I cannot let you through. Oh, don't knock at my heart, little one. I cannot bear the pain of turning deaf ears to your call time and time again. You do not know the monster men inhabiting the earth. Oh, be still. Shh, be still, my precious child. I cannot give you birth.
Jamaican-born Claude McKay was a radical poet, novelist, and journalist who became one of the most respected writers of the Harlem Renaissance. If We Must Die, published in the July 1919 issue of The Liberator, was written in response to the Red Summer of 1919, during which hundreds of Black people were murdered at the hands of vigilante mobs and in race riots throughout the country.
Zora Neale Hurston was an American folklorist, writer, and filmmaker who celebrated the African-American culture of the rural South. And here she is reading Georgia's Skin.
Surely. But I'll have to give all that other data to. My name is Zora Neale Hurston, and I'm going to sing a gambling song that I collected at Bois, Florida. That's term time still there. And the men are playing a game called Georgia's Skin. That's the most favorite gambling game among the workers of the South. And they lose money on the drop of a card, the fall of a card. And there's a rhythm to the fall of the card, and after they get set with the two principals and the other people are called pikers, and anybody that wants a special card, he pick it out and they call that picking one in the rough. And after,
I think it's better if you explain us how the card, which way the cards get out, or how people are set there.
Well, you see, they take a deck of cards and they shuffle it real good and watch the man to be sure he don't steal nothing. That is, that he don't set a cub. There are 4 cards of every kind in the deck, and when a card like the card that you have selected falls, you lose. Sometime, if you don't watch the dealer, he'll shuffle the 3 cards just like his own down to the bottom of the deck, so everybody falls before he does, and then he wins all the money.
Well, what does he do? Is the dealer holding the deck of cards?
And he puts it on the table. They don't allow him to hold it because they're afraid he'll steal. So he puts it on the table and he turns off a card. And
turns off the card
by card.
Yeah.
And if the card that is just like yours, when it falls, you lose. And so they holler when he gets all set, when the principals have got their cards and all the pikers have got theirs, and then the man will say, you want them to put the bets down. And he'll say, put the money on the wood and make the bet go good. And then again, put it in sight and save a fight. And so they all get the bets down, and then they'll holler, let the deal go down. Boys, let the deal go down. And some of them will stop singing.
For us. The first one is nonfiction, and the other fiction.
I am colored, but I offer nothing in the way of extenuating circumstances, except the fact that I am the only Negro in the United States whose grandfather on the mother's side was not an Indian chief. But I am not tragically colored. There's no great sorrow dammed up in my soul, nor lurking behind my eyes. I do not mind at all. I do not belong to the sobbing school of Negrohood who hold that nature somehow has given them a low-down, dirty deal and whose feelings are all hurt about it. Even in the helter-skelter skirmish that is my life, I have seen that the world is to the strong, regardless of a little pigmentation, more or less. No, I do not weep at the world. I'm too busy sharpening my oyster knife. Someone is always at my elbow reminding me that I am the granddaughter of slaves. It fails to register depression with me. Slavery is 60 years in the past. The operation was successful and the patient is doing well, thank you. The terrible struggle that made me an American out of a potential slave said, on the line. The Reconstruction said, get set. And the generation before said, go. I am off to a flying start and I must not halt in the stretch to look behind and weep. At certain times, I have no race. I am me. When I set my hat at a certain angle and saunter down 7th Avenue, Harlem City, feeling as snooty as the lions in front of the 42nd Street Library, for instance, so far as my feelings are concerned, Peggy Hopkins Joyce on the Boulimiche, with her gorgeous raiment, stately carriage, knees knocking together in a most aristocratic manner, has nothing on me. The cosmic Zora emerges. I belong to no race nor time. I am the eternal feminine with a string of beads. And sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it does not make me angry. It merely astonishes me. How can any deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's beyond me.
Of Zora's voice is called That Old Black Gal.
That Old Black Gal is a spiking song that I got down there in Miami and was sung by Max Ford, the singing line on this construction crew. What's it used for? Used for spiking down the rails. That old black gal keep on grumbling. New pair of shoes, Lord, a new pair of shoes. I'm going to buy her shoes and stockings, slippers too, Lord, slippers too. I'm going to give her all my money. Kisses too, Lord, kisses too.
And this last reading is from Hurston's classic novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. So, the beginning of this was a woman, and she had come back from burying the dead, not the dead of sick and ailing with friends at the pillow and the feet. She had come back from the sodden and the bloated, the sudden dead, their eyes flung wide open in judgment. The people all saw her come because it was sundown. The sun was gone, but he had left his footprints in the sky. It was the time for sitting on porches beside the road. It was the time to hear things and talk. These sitters had been tongueless, earless, eyeless conveniences all day long. Mules and other brutes had occupied their skins. But now, the sun and the boss man were gone. So the skins felt powerful and human. They became lords of sounds and lesser things. They passed nations through their mouths. They sat in judgment. Seeing the women as she was made them remember the envy they had stored up from other times. So they chewed up the back parts of their minds and swallowed with relish. They made burning statements with questions and killing tools out of laughs. It was mass cruelty, a mood come alive. Words walking without masters, walking all together like harmony in a song. What's she doing coming back here in them overalls? Can't she find no dress to put on? Wear that blue satin dress she left here in. Where all that money her husband took and died and left her? What that old 40-year-old woman doing with her hair swinging down her back like some young gal? Where she left that young lad of a boy she went off here with. Thought she was going to marry where he left her. What he done with all her money? Betcha he off with some gal so young she ain't even got no hairs. Why she don't stay in her own class? Ooh. When she got to where they were, she turned her face on the banderlog and spoke. They scrambled a noisy, good evening, and left their mouths setting open and their ears full of hope. Her speech was pleasant enough, but she kept walking straight on to her gate. The porch couldn't talk for looking. The men noticed her firm buttocks, like she had grapefruits in her hip pockets, the great rope of black hair swinging to her waist and unraveling in the wind like a plume. Then her pugnacious breasts trying to bore holes in her shirt. They, the men, were saving with the mind what they lost with the eye. The women took the faded shirt and muddy overalls and laid them away for remembrance. It was a weapon against her strength, and if it turned out of no significance, still it was a hope that she might fall to their level someday. But nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even thought to swallow spit until after her gate slammed behind her.
Boldly assertive, unabashedly in love with Black people, and insistent on the value of Black vernacular culture, Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes were two of the brightest stars of the Harlem Renaissance. And though both emerged as important voices in the 1920s, they would continue to produce important work in the decades that followed as well. Section in Hughes's autobiography, written before he was 40 years old, The Big C, published in 1940. This excerpt is from the section When the Negro Was in Vogue.
The 1920s were the years of Manhattan's Black Renaissance. It began with Shuffle Along, Running Wild, and the Charleston. Perhaps some people would say even the Emperor Jones, Charles Gilpin, and the Tom-Toms at the Provincetown. But certainly it was the musical review Shuffle Along that gave a scintillating send-off to that Negro vogue in Manhattan, which reached its peak just before the crash of 1929, the crash that sent Negroes, white folks, and all rolling down the hill toward the Works Progress Administration. Put down the 20s for the rise of Roland Hayes, who packed Carnegie Hall, the rise of Paul Robeson in New York and London, of Florence Mills over 2 continents, of Rose McClendon in Broadway parts that never measured up to her, the booming voice of Bessie Smith, and the low moan of Clara on thousands of records, and the rise of that grand comedienne of song, Ethel Waters, singing, "Charlie's elected now, he's in right for sure." Put down the 1920s for Louis Armstrong and Gladys Bentley and Josephine Baker. White people began to come to Harlem in droves. For several years, they packed the expensive Cotton Club on Lenox Avenue, but I was never there because the Cotton Club was a Jim Crow club for gangsters and moneyed whites. They were not cordial to Negro patronage, unless you were a celebrity like Bojangles. So Harlem Negroes did not like the Cotton Club and never appreciated its Jim Crow policy in the very heart of their dark community. Nor did ordinary Negroes like the growing influx of whites toward Harlem after sundown, flooding the little cabarets and bars where formerly only colored people laughed and sang, and where now the strangers were given the best ringside tables to sit and stare at the Negro customers, like amusing animals in a zoo. The Negroes said, "We can't go downtown and sit and stare at you in your clubs. You won't even let us in your clubs." But they didn't say it out loud, for Negroes are practically never rude to white people. So thousands of whites came to Harlem night after night, thinking the Negroes loved to have them there, and firmly believing that all Harlem nights left their houses at sundown to sing and dance in cabarets, because most of the whites saw nothing but the cabarets, not the houses. All of us know that the gay and sparkling life of the so-called Negro Renaissance of the 20s was not so gay and sparkling beneath the surface as it looked. It was a period when Charleston preachers opened up shouting churches as sideshows for white tourists. It was a period when at least one charming colored chorus girl, amber enough to pass for a Latin American, was living in a penthouse with all her bills paid by a gentleman whose name was Banker's Magic on Wall Street. It was a period when every season there was at least one hit play on Broadway acted by a Negro cast, and when books by Negro authors were being published with much greater frequency and much more publicity than ever before or since in history. It was a period when white writers wrote about Negroes more successfully, commercially speaking, than Negroes did about themselves. It was the period, God help us, when Ethel Barrymore appeared in blackface in Scarlett's Sister Mary. It was the period when the Negro was in vogue. I was there. I had a swell time while it lasted, but I thought it wouldn't last long. I remember the vogue for things Russian, the season that Chauve-souris first came to town. For how could a large and enthusiastic number of people be crazy about Negroes forever? But some Harlemites thought the millennium had come. They thought the race people problem had at last been solved through art plus Gladys Bentley. They were sure the new Negro would lead a new life from then on in green pastures of tolerance created by County Cullen, Ethel Waters, Claude McKay, Duke Ellington, Bojangles, and Alain Locke. I don't know what made any Negroes think that, except that they were mostly intellectuals doing the thinking. The ordinary Negroes hadn't heard of the Negro Renaissance, and if they had, it hadn't raised their wages any. Harlem was like a great magnet for the Negro intellectual, pulling him from everywhere. Or perhaps the magnet was New York, but once in New York, he had to live in Harlem, for rooms were hardly to be found elsewhere unless one could pass for white or Mexican or Eurasian, or perhaps live in the village, which always seemed to me a very arty locale, in spite of the many new real artists and writers who lived there. Only a few of the new Negroes lived in the village, Harlem being their real stamping ground.
Jean Toomer was born in 1894 and by 1920 had settled in New York, where he began writing poems and short stories. Kane is a work of narrative prose, poetry, and passages of dialogue published in 1923 during the Harlem Renaissance. Our excerpt is from a character, Esther, at age 22. This passage contains language we don't condone, and we ask listeners to understand we are honoring the work of the author.
Esther's schooling is over. She works behind the counter of her father's grocery store to keep the money in the family, so he said. She is learning to make distinctions between the business and the social worlds. Good business comes from remembering that the white folks don't divide the niggers, Esther. Be just as black as any man who has a silver dollar. Esther listlessly forgets that she is near white and that her father is the richest colored man in town. Black folk who drift in to buy lard and snuff and flour of her call her a sweet-natured, accommodating girl. She learns their names, she forgets them. She thinks about men. I don't appeal to them. I wonder why. She recalls an affair she had with a little fair boy while still in school. It had ended in her shame when he as much as told her that for sweetness, he preferred a lollipop. She remembers the salesman from the north who wanted to take her to the movies that first night he was in town. She refused, of course, and he never came back, having found out who she was. She thinks of Barlow. Barlow's image gives her a slightly stale thrill. She spices it by telling herself his glories. Black, magnetically so. Best cotton picker in the county, in the state, in the whole world for that matter. Best man with his fists, best man with dice, with a razor. Promoter of church benefits, of colored fairs. Vagrant preacher, lover of all the women for miles and miles around. Esther decides that she loves him. And with a vague sense of life slipping by, she resolves that she will tell him so, whatever people say, the next time he comes to town. After the making of this resolution, which becomes a sort of wedding cake for her to tuck beneath her pillow and go to sleep upon, she sees nothing of Barlow for 5 years. Her hair thins. It looks like the dull silk on puny corn ears. Her face pales until it is the color of the gray dust that dances with dead cotton leaves.
According to literary legend, Langston Hughes nicknamed Dorothy West the Kid because she was the youngest of the Harlem Renaissance writers. When the excitement of the Renaissance gave way to the harsh economic realities of the Depression, Dorothy West founded the short-lived literary magazine Challenge, later called New Challenge, which featured a new generation of writers such as Margaret Walker, Richard Wright, and Ralph Ellison. Here's the voice of Dorothy West, and following that, we'll hear an excerpt from her novel, The Living is Easy, which was published in 1948, known for its wry humor and some would say sassiness in the midst of moral and social challenges.
My point being, sometimes the Bostonians boast, the black Bostonians, perhaps the whites too, boast a little to the New Yorkers that they were the original settlers on the island. And I must say, I remember when it started, this man's name may not mean anything to you. Harry T. Burleigh was a composer. And many of the spirituals that you hear, he was the one who went south, an educated man. He was the one that went south and heard these spirituals and preserved them, put them to music and one thing and another. Well, my point is, he was from New York, and he came here every summer because he knew many Bostonians and fell in love with the island, and then began telling the New Yorkers what a lovely place it was. Then they began to come down to the island. But the original people were Bostonians, and as I said, when the little colony grew, it grew to about 12 families. And then you asked me about the Bostonians and the blacks. Now, we went on the beach and we sat. Now, as I said, half the things I say with gentle fun. I mean, we would sit on the beach and we behaved well. Then the New Yorkers came. Then the New Yorkers began to come because, as I told you, Harry Burleigh told them about the island. We sat quietly on the beach. The New Yorkers came. They will kill me for this. They had never had such freedom because, you see, you had the whole island here, if you understand. Whereas, where the various beaches they had come from, Highland Beach, they had a section. I mean, somebody owned the house, not one of them. Some year-round black person owned the house. And therefore, they went to the stretch of beach in front of that house. Do you see? But here you could drive up to Gay Head, you could go all over, you see. You could go to South Beach and one thing another. So they had never had such freedom, and they wouldn't like that expression. But at any rate, and of course, it was so much as part, but the women they were good-looking women in good-looking clothes, and I'm sure they looked good, but they had paint on their faces. And only sporting women, I think was the phrase, only sporting. That was euphemism for kept women. And so they had paint and smoked cigarettes. The women smoked cigarettes. But even worse than that, they carried, you see, they were boarding, and they wanted to stay on the beach all day. So they had food in baskets, and mostly chicken. Chicken, I think, travels well in baskets. But you see, we have a reputation for eating chicken and watermelon. So that there they was, and we said they're going to lose the beach for us. They're going to lose the beach. And I swear to God, once somebody came down and said private.
She said passionately, "You run a big store. You take in a lot of money. But whenever I corner you for a dime, it's like pulling teeth to get it out of you. You always have the same excuse. You need every dollar to buy bananas. And when I say, what's the sense in being in business if you can't enjoy your cash? You always say, in business, you have to spend money to make money. Now, when I try to advise you to buy a few measly sticks of bedroom furniture, a man who spends thousands of dollars on fruit, you balk like a mule at a racetrack." He rubbed his mustache with his forefinger. "I see what you mean," he conceded. "I try to keep my store filled with fruit. I can't bear to see any empty storeroom. I guess you got a right to feel the same way about a house. In the long run, it's better to be able to call every stick your own than have half your rooms dependent on some outsider's furniture." She expelled a long breath. That's settled then. He thought it prudent to warn her. We'll have to economize to the bone while we're furnishing that house. She rolled her eyes upward. We'll even eat bones if you say so. He answered quietly. You and the child will never eat less than the best as long as I live. And all my planning is to see to it that you'll never know want when I'm gone. No one on earth will ever say that I wasn't a good provider. I'd clear. I guess you're not the worst husband in the world, she acknowledged softly and added slowly. And I guess I'm the kind of wife God made me. But she did not like the echo of that in her ears. She said quickly, "And you can like it or lump it." Bart took out an impressive roll of bills, peeled off a few of the lesser ones, and laid them on the table. The sight of the bankroll made Cleo sick with envy. There were so many things she could do with it. All Mr. Judson would do with it is buy more bananas. She sighed and counted her modest pile. There were only $45. "It's $5 short," she said frigidly. "Yep," he said complacently. "I figure if this Jack the Ripper wants $50, he'll take 45 if he knows he'll get it every month on the dot. And if he ever goes up $5 on the rent, we still won't be paying him any more than he asked for in the first place. In business, Cleo, I've learned to stay on my toes. You've got to get up with the early birds to get ahead of me."
Chicago, where he wrote for the Works Progress Administration's Federal Writers Project, to Harlem, where he published Uncle Tom's Children and Native Son. The same year Wright moved to Harlem, the New York Society Library moved to the Upper East Side. Marion King, in her popular history of the library, reported that Wright's Black Boy, published in 1945, was one of 2 highly popular autobiographies at the library that season. Here's the voice of Richard Wright, followed by a reading of an excerpt of Black Boy.
Hurry up, hurry up! Got the gun?
Yeah. I know it.
They won't get us. The first thing they'll do in looking for me is to go to your room. I had to bring you here.
What happened? Where's that girl?
She's dead.
Oh, God.
But I won't give up. They gotta fight for me.
You told me you never was gonna kill.
I didn't kill. That's the truth, and they never told the truth.
Did kill her?
Forget that girl. We gotta think of ourselves. If they find you here, you'll cry and tell everything. Come on. Give me the gun. Come on.
Bigger, you crazy. This is the first place they'll look. They'll remember you said leave the ransom money here.
Shut up. I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna hide here because they think I'm too scared to come here. I'm smarter than they are. Come on.
It would have been impossible for me to have told anyone what I derived from these novels, for it was nothing less than a sense of life itself. All my life had shaped me for the realism, the naturalism of the modern novel, and I could not read enough of them. Now, steeped in new moods and ideas, I bought a ream of paper and tried to write, but nothing would come, and what did come was flat beyond telling. I discovered that more than desire and feeling were necessary to write, and I dropped the pen, the idea. Yet I still wondered how it was possible to know people sufficiently to write about them. Could I ever learn about life and people? To me, with my vast ignorance, my Jim Crow station in life, it seemed a task impossible of achievement. I now knew what being a Negro meant. I could endure the hunger. I had learned to live with hate, but to feel that there were feelings denied me, that the very breath of life itself was beyond my reach, that more than anything else hurt, wounded me. I had a new hunger. In buoying me up, reading also cast me down, made me see what was possible, what I had missed. My attention returned, new, terrible, bitter, surging, almost too great to be contained. I no longer felt that the world about me was hostile, killing. I knew it. A million times I asked myself what I could do to save myself, and there were no answers. I seemed forever condemned, ringed by walls. I did not discuss my reading with Mr. Falk, who had lent me his library card. It would have meant talking about myself, and that would have been too painful. I smiled each day, fighting desperately to maintain my own behavior, to keep my disposition seemingly sunny. But some of the white men discerned that I had begun to brood.
Three excerpts from Ann Petrie's novel, The Street.
There was a cold November wind blowing through 116th Street. It rattled the tops of garbage cans, sucked window shades out through the top of opened windows, and set them flapping back against the windows. And it drove most of the people off the street in the block between 7th and 8th Avenues, except for a few hurried pedestrians who bent double in an effort to offer the least possible exposed surface to its violent assault. It found every scrap of paper along the street, theater throwaways, announcements of dances and lodge meetings, the heavy waxed paper that loaves of bread had been wrapped in, the thinner waxed paper that had enclosed sandwiches, old envelopes, newspapers. Fingering its way along the curb, the wind set the bits of paper to dancing high in the air, so that barrage of paper swirled into the faces of the people on the street. It even took time to rush into doorways and areaways and find chicken bones and pork chop bones and push them along the curb. Ludi reached out and rang the super's bell. It made a shrill sound that echoed and re-echoed inside the apartment and came back out into the hall. Immediately, a dog started a furious barking that came closer and closer as he ran toward the door of the apartment. Then the weight of his body landed against the door, and she drew back as he threw himself against the door again and again until the door began to shiver from the impact of his weight. There was the horrid sound of his nose snuffing up air, trying to get her scent. And then his weight hurled against the door again. She retreated toward the street door, pausing there with her hand on the knob. Then she heard heavy footsteps, the sound of a man's voice threatening the dog, and she walked back toward the apartment. She knew instantly by his faded blue overalls that the man who opened the door was the super. The hot, fetid air from the apartment and back of him came out into the hall. She could hear the faint sound of steam hissing in the radiators. Then the dog tried to plunge past the man, and the man kicked the dog back into the apartment, kicked him in the side until the dog cringed away from him with its tail between its legs. She heard the dog whine deep in his throat, and then the murmur of a woman's voice, a whispering voice talking to the dog. I came to see about the apartment, the 3-room apartment that's vacant, she said. It's on the top floor. You want to look at it? The light in the hall was dim like that light in Mrs. Hedges' apartment. She pulled her coat around her a little tighter. It's this bad light, she thought. Somehow the man's eyes were worse than the eyes of the woman sitting in the window. And she told herself that it was because she was so tired. That was the reason she was seeing things, building up pretty pictures in people's eyes. He was a tall, gaunt man, and he towered in the doorway looking at her. It isn't the bad light, she thought. It isn't my imagination, for after his first quick furtive glance, his eyes had filled with a hunger so urgent that she was instantly afraid of him and afraid to show fear. But the apartment. Did she want the apartment? Not in this house where he was super. Not in this house where Mrs. Hedges lived, no. She didn't want to see the apartment. The dark, dirty 3 rooms called an apartment. Then she thought of where she lived now.
With the publication of her first novel, The Street, in 1946, Ann Petrie gained widespread attention as a writer and a cultural figure. The Street became the first novel by an African-American woman to sell more than 1 million copies. Petrie's fiction of the 1940s, including The Street, features characters like Ludi Johnson, ordinary, law-abiding, working-class African-American protagonist. Most start off devoted to hard work, driven by middle-class aspirations, with a strong belief in the American dream. But as they are thwarted at every turn by individual and institutional racism, and in the women's cases, by violent sexism, they end up resigned, filled with despair, and often engaged in destructive, sometimes violent acts.
Luli walked quickly out of the room, pushed the street door open, and shivered as the cold air touched her. It had been hot in the super's room, and she paused a second to push her coat collar tight around her neck in an effort to make a barrier against the wind howling in the street outside. Now that she had this apartment, she was just one step farther up the ladder of success. With the apartment, Bub would be standing a better chance, for he'd be away from Lil. Inside the building, the dog let out a high, shrill yelp.
Ralph Waldo Ellison published Invisible Man in 1952, which won the National Book Award, opening Ellison's way into the American literary establishment. Let's see a clip of Ellison, followed by a reading from the prologue of his classic novel, Invisible Man.
About the United States as a scene in which and about which one writes fiction is that, damn it, you just have to try, it seems to me, to get a big enough cut of it to get the minimum sense of diversity and variety. That's a big challenge. It's still a big challenge, and you know there's so many excuses offered for not trying to grapple with it. You know, you seize upon something like the novel of manners, as though we could have a European novel of manners in this country. I don't think it's possible. I don't even think it's desirable. You know, you can take advantage of all of the theories, all of the insights of anybody, from Burke through Empson to Sir James Fraser, but you still got this crazy, highly mobile country with every damn thing happening, and about the only people who are not trying to deal with it seem to be novelists. I mean, this is unfair in a way, but not so very unfair. I would you know, as a kid, listen to the Pullman porters when they started telling what was happening up the line. You knew that you were the same people living in Oklahoma City as against those who were living in St. Joe, Missouri, or Chicago, or Kansas City. But you also knew that things were a little bit different in Kansas City, Kansas, as against Kansas City, Missouri. Mm-hmm. And there they were, twin cities, so to speak. But they were always reporting the variety and always giving you a report on the manners. But, God, you could pick up novel after novel after novel now, and you get a sense that there's no United States out there.
I am an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe. Nor am I one of those Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids. And I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me, like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows. It is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. Nor is my invisibility exactly a matter of a biochemical accident to my epidermis. That invisibility to which I refer occurs because of a peculiar disposition of the eyes of those with whom I come in contact, a matter of the construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. I am not complaining, nor am I protesting either. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves. Then, too, you're constantly being bumped against by those of poor vision. Or, again, you often doubt if you really exist. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds. Say, a figure in a nightmare which the sleeper tries with all his strength to destroy. It's when you feel like this that, out of resentment, you begin to bump people back. And let me confess, you feel that way most of the time. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world, that you're a part of all the sound and anguish, and you strike out with your fist, you curse, and you swear to make them recognize you. And alas, it's seldom successful.
Let's hear Gwendolyn Brooks reading her well-known poem, We Real Cool. Because of the sound quality, the words will appear on your screen.
Thank you. I guess I'd better offer you We Real Cool. Most young people know me only by that poem. I don't mean that I dislike it, but I would prefer it if the textbook compilers and the anthologists would assume that I've written a few other poems. I wrote it because I was passing by a pool hall in my community one afternoon during school time, and I saw therein a little bunch of boys, I say here in this poem, 7, and they were shooting pool. But instead of asking myself, why aren't they in school, I asked myself, I wonder how they feel about themselves. And just perhaps they might have considered themselves contemptuous of the establishment, or at least they wanted to feel that they were contemptuous of the establishment, might want to thumb their noses at the establishment. And I represented the establishment with the month of June, which is a nice, gentle, non-controversial, enjoyable, pleasant, fragrant month that everybody loves. This poem has been banned here and there because of the word jazz, which some people have considered a sexual reference. That was not my intention, though I have no objection if it helps anybody. But I was thinking of music. The pool players, 7 at the Golden Shovel. We real cool, we left school, we learnt late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon.
Gwendolyn Brooks, quote, since she began publishing her tight lyrics of Chicago's Great South Side in the 1940s, Gwendolyn Brooks has been one of the most influential poets of the 20th century. Her poems distill the very best aspects of modernist style with the sounds and shapes of various African-American forms and idioms, end quote. Gwendolyn Brooks was a singular talent, a genius of form, whose writing has influenced generations of Black poets. In 1950, she became the first African-American person to win a Pulitzer Prize in any category. Now, we'll hear a reading of her poem, A Song in the Front Yard.
A song in the front yard. I've stayed in the front yard all my life. I want to peek at the back where it's rough and untended and hungry weed grows. A girl gets sick of a rose. I want to go in the backyard now and maybe down the alley to where the charity children play. I want a good time today. They do some wonderful things. They have some wonderful fun. My mother sneers, but I say it's fine how they don't have to go in at 8:45. My mother, she tells me that Johnny May will grow up to be a bad woman, that George will be taken to jail soon or late on account of last winter he sold our back gate. But I say it's fine. Honest, I do. And I'd like to be a bad woman too, and wear the brave stockings of night black lace and strut down the streets with paint on my face.
Long before academics turned their attention to the African diaspora or the Black Atlantic, Paule Marshall mapped this terrain in novels, novellas, and short stories. Her experience as a child of immigrants, her childhood in a Brooklyn populated by Blacks from the Caribbean and the American South, and her travels as an adult throughout the Americas and Africa all informed her artistic vision. She understood the relationship between slavery, colonialism, racism, and neocolonialism, and the formation of the modern Black subject. Here is the voice of Paule Marshall.
What did you learn from Langston Hughes, and how did you first meet him?
I first met, well, of course, I had known his work all along.
Of course.
Yes. And one of the things that struck me, The Big Sea and I Wander As I Wander, his two books about traveling, I came across in the library as a teenager, and I knew that he was the writer for me because this is exactly what I wanted to do. The Big Sea meaning to travel, you know. I wonder as I wander. That struck me as just the most marvelous life that one could possibly have, and also be a writer, you see. So he was someone that I admired from early on.
Triangular Road is
Yes.
the name of your memoir. What are the 3 points?
The 3 points are, in a sense, what defines me. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, USA, so that is very much there. My parents came from a tiny, tiny island in the Caribbean called Barbados. That's the second link. And then I was invited some years ago to visit Africa, and saw, just as I was doing research for the trip, looking at maps, saw that Barbados was the first point. This little tiny island was the first point for many of the slave ships coming from the Gold Coast. So there are the 3 points that define me.
How did it change you, having actually experienced Africa, a piece of it anyway, in person?
In person, it was, in a sense, coming home and feeling very comfortable there, but also feeling embraced. All of these people at the conference, it was a big conference held in Nigeria, in Lagos. All of these other scholars and writers from Africa and so on were coming over to kind of tell me what part of my face, belonged to them. The shape of the nose, the lips, the contour of the cheeks, and so on.
As you write, that Africa represents, quote, the greater portion of my tripartite self that I had yet to discover, yet to know.
And yet to know.
Do you keep going back?
No, what I'm going to be working on next is that further penetration into Africa to discover that self.
Where do you want to go?
I'm going to, I've touched base there once or twice. I'm going to start out in Kenya, then go down to, then to Uganda, and as further south as I can get.
And you write that the Atlantic is, quote, an entire ocean permanently sitting shiva.
Yes, sitting shiva. When you walk along the Atlantic, you can hear a kind, and as it comes in, and a powerful waves, it's as if it's tearing itself apart. And you know, the whole ritual in Shiva is the Jewish ritual of mourning, where the women, you know, sort of tear their clothes and so on. As I walked, the first time I walked along the Atlantic in Barbados, I said, this sea is sitting shiva for the tyranny that took place.
Do you think our country is starting to come to terms with the heritage of slavery in a meaningful way?
Well, I think there's emotions, yes, I think so, but there is so much more by way of practical acknowledgement that it still needs to be done.
So moving to see Paule Marshall. Paule Marshall's first novel, Brown Girl Brownstones, published in 1959, is a groundbreaking work focusing on a Brooklyn-based family of immigrants from Barbados. The two central figures, the mother and daughter, Scylla and Selena, are unique in all of American literature. In Marshall's hands, Brooklyn's legendary brownstones become major characters as well.
Somnolent July afternoon, the unbroken line of brownstone houses down the long Brooklyn street resembled an army massed at attention. They were all one uniform red brownstone, all with high, massive stone stoops and black iron-grilled fences staving off the sun, all draped in ivy as though mourning. Their somber facades, indifferent to the summer's heat and passion, faced a park while their backs reared dark against the sky. They were only 3 or 4 stories tall, squat, yet they gave the impression of formidable height. Glancing down the interminable Brooklyn street, you thought of those joined brownstones as one house reflected through a train of mirrors, with no walls between the houses, but only vast rooms yawning endlessly one into the other. Yet, looking close, you saw that under the thick ivy, each house had something distinctively its own. Some touch that was Gothic, Romanesque, Baroque, or Greek triumphed amid the Victorian clutter. Here, Ionic columns framed the windows, while next door, gargoyles scowled up at the sun. There, the cornices were hung with carved foliage, while Gorgon heads decorated others. Many houses had bay windows or Gothic stonework. A few boasted turrets raised high above the other roofs. Yet, they all shared the same brown monotony. All seemed doomed by the confusion in their design. Behind those grim facades, in those high rooms, life soared and ebbed. Bodies crouched in the postures of love at night. Children burst from the womb's thick shell, and death, when it was time, shuffled through the halls. First, there had been the Dutch English and Scotch Irish who had built the houses. There had been tea in the afternoon then, and skirts rustling across the parquet floors and mild voices. For a long time, it had been only the whites, each generation unraveling in a quiet skein of years behind the green shades. But now, in 1939, the last of them were discreetly dying behind those shades, or selling the houses and moving away. And as they left, the West Indians slowly edged their way in, like a dark sea nudging its way onto a white beach and staining the sand. they came. The West Indians, especially the Barbadians, who had never owned anything perhaps but a few poor acres in a poor land, loved the houses with the same fierce idolatry as they had the land on their obscure islands.
Lorraine Hansberry was born in Chicago in 1930. Her play, The Crystal Stair, later renamed A Raisin in the Sun, was a groundbreaking success. Here's archival audio of Lorraine Hansberry in an interview with Studs Terkel.
One of the most sound ideas in dramatic writing is that in order to create the universal, you must pay very great attention to the specific. In other words, I've told people that not only is this a Negro family, specifically and definitely, culturally, but it's not even a New York family or a Southern Negro family. It is specifically South Side Chicago. That kind of care, that kind of attention to the detail of reference and so forth. In other words, I think people will, to the extent they accept them and believe them as who they're supposed to be, to that extent they can become everybody. So it's definitely a Negro play before it's anything else.
The universality itself is italicized when you say something specific about a specific human being or a group of human beings, as you did here.
Universality, I think, emerges from truthful identity.
Enjoy some excerpts of A Raisin in the Sun by our readers.
See, that's the old stuff. You and that boy that was here today, you all want everyone to carry a flag and a spear and sing some marching songs, huh? You want to spend the rest of your life looking into things, trying to find the right and the wrong parts, huh? Yeah. You know what's going to happen to that boy someday? He'll find himself sitting in a dungeon, locked in forever, and the takers will have the key. Forget about it, baby. There ain't no causes. There ain't nothing but taking in this world. And he who takes most is smartest, and it don't make a damn bit of difference how.
You're making something inside me cry, son. Some awful pain inside
Don't cry,
me.
mama. Understand. That white man is going to walk in that door able to write checks for more money than we ever had. It's important to him. And I'm going to help him. I'm going to put on the show, mama. I came over. I had some free time. I thought I might help with the packing. I like the look of packing crates. A household in preparation for a journey. It depresses some people, but for me, it is another feeling. Something full of the flow of life. Do you understand? A movement, progress. It makes me think of Africa.
Africa.
And what kind of mood is this? Have I told you how deeply you move me?
He gave away the money, Osagai.
Who gave away what money?
The insurance money. My brother gave it away.
Gave it away?
He made an investment with a man even Travis wouldn't have trusted with his most worn-out marbles.
And it is gone.
Gone.
I'm very sorry. And you now.
Me. I'm nothing. Me. When I was very small, we used to take our sleds out in the wintertime, and the only hills we had were the ice-covered stone steps of some houses down the street. And we used to fill them in with snow and make them smooth and slide down them all day. And it was very dangerous, you know, far too deep. And sure enough, one day a kid named Rufus came down too fast and hit the sidewalk, and we saw his face just split open right there in front of us. And I remember standing there looking at his bloody open face, thinking that was the end of Rufus. But the ambulance came and they took him to the hospital and they fixed the broken bones and they sewed it all up. And the next time I saw Rufus, he just had a little line down the middle of his face. I never got over that.
What?
That was what one person could do for another. Fix him up, sew up the problem, make him all right again. That was the most marvelous thing in the world. I wanted to do that. I always thought it was the one concrete thing in the world that a human being could do. Fix up the sick, and make them whole again. This was truly being God.
You wanted to be God.
No, I wanted to cure. It used to be so important to me. I wanted to cure. It used to matter. I used to care. I mean about people and how their bodies
And you've
hurt.
stopped caring.
Yes.
Why?
I think so. Because it doesn't seem deep enough, close enough to what ails mankind. It was a child's way of seeing things, or
Well,
an
children
idealist.
see things very well sometimes. An idealist even better.
I know that's what you think. Because you are still where I left off. You with all your talk and dreams about Africa. You still think you can patch up the world, cure the great sore of colonialism with the penicillin of independence. Independence. And then what? What about all the crooks and thieves and just plain idiots who will come into power and steal and plunder the same as before? Only now they will be black and do it in the name of the new independence.
Well,
what
that
about
will
them?
be the problem for another time. First, we must get there.
And where does it end?
End? Whoever spoke of an end to life, to living?
An end to misery, to stupidity. Don't you see? There isn't any real progress, Asagai. There is only one large circle that we march in, around and around, each of us with our own little picture in front of us, our own little mirage that we think is
That is the mistake. What you just said about that circle. It isn't a circle, it is simply a long line, as in geometry, one that reaches into infinity. And because we cannot see the end, we also cannot see how it changes. And it is very odd, but those who see that changes, who dream, who will not give up, are called idealists. And those who see only the circle, we call them the realist.
Asagai, while I was sleeping in that bed in there, people went out and took the future right out of my hands. And nobody asked me. Nobody consulted me. They just went out and changed
Was it your
my
money?
life.
Was it your money he gave away?
It
But
belonged
did
to all
you
of
earn
us.
it? Would you have had it at all if your father had not died? Then,
No.
isn't there something wrong in a house, in a world where all dreams, good or bad, must depend on the death of a man? I never thought to see you like this, Alayo. Your brother made a mistake and you are grateful to him so that now you can give up the ailing human race on account of it. You talk about what good is struggle, what good is anything, where are we all going and why are we bothering?
And you
I
cannot
live the
answer
answer.
it.
In my village, at home, it is the exceptional man who can even read a newspaper, or whoever sees a book at all. I will go home, and much of what I will have to say will seem strange to the people of my village. But I will teach and work, and things will happen slowly and swiftly. At times, it will seem that nothing changes at all. And then again, the sudden dramatic events which make history leap into the future. And then quiet again. Retrogression, even. Guns, murder, revolution. And I even will have moments when I wonder if the quiet was not better than all the death and hatred. But I will look about my village at the illiteracy and disease and ignorance, and I will not wonder long. And perhaps I will be a great man. I mean, perhaps I will hold on to the substance of truth and find my way always with the right course. And perhaps for it I will be butchered in my bed by some night by the servants of empire. Or
a martyr.
Perhaps I shall live to be a very old man, respected and esteemed in my new nation. And perhaps I shall hold office. And this is what I'm trying to tell you, Alayo. Perhaps the things I believe now for my country will be wrong and outmoded, and I will not understand and do terrible things to have things my way or merely to keep my power. Don't you see that there will be young men and women, not British soldiers then, but my own black countrymen, to step out of the shadows some evening and slit my then useless throat? Don't you see? They have always been there, that they always will be, and that such a thing as my own death will be an advance. They who might kill me even, actually replenish all that I was.
Well, Asagai, I know
Good.
all of that.
Then stop moaning and groaning and tell me what you plan to do.
Do?
I have a bit of a suggestion.
What?
That when it is all over, that you come home with me.
Oh, Asagai, at this moment, you decide to be romantic.
Oh, my dear young creature of the new world. I do not mean across the city, I mean across the ocean. Home to Africa. Yes.
To Africa?
300 years later, the African prince rose up out of the seas and swept the maiden back across the Middle Passage over which her ancestors had come.
To
Nigeria.
To Nigeria?
Home. I will show you our mountains and our stars and give you cool drinks from gourds and teach you the old songs and the ways of our people. And in time, we will pretend that you have only been away for a day. Say that you will come.
You're getting me all mixed up. Too many things have happened today. I must sit and think. I don't know what I feel about anything right this minute.
All right. I shall leave you. No, don't get up. Just sit a while and think. Never be afraid to sit a while and think. How often I have looked at you and said, so this is what the new world had finally wrought.
Well. All I can say is if this is my time in life, my time to say goodbye to those goddamn cracking walls and these marching roaches and this cramped little closet which ain't now or never was no kitchen, then I say it loud and good, hallelujah! And goodbye, misery. I don't never want to see your ugly face again.
James Baldwin is one of our most prescient and prolific prophetic voices. Although he is without question a highly accomplished essayist and orator, he was also a very gifted fiction writer. It is in his fiction, in his imaginative writing, where he reveals the deep complexity, beauty, and pain of what it means to be Black in America, indeed, of what it means to be human. Here's an audio of James Baldwin, followed by an excerpt from his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, which was published in 1953.
Now, according to me, what an artist is, who an artist is simply somebody who helps you see reality again. The pressures of everyone's life, including, if I may say so, those of the artist, are so great that one has, in self-defense, in order to survive, in order to get through one single day, to learn certain habits, to take certain things for granted, with the effect, inevitably, that by and by, you don't see anything. Now let me repeat that. I've had to assume, for example, I have to take for granted that this platform will not fall down beneath me. I must take that for granted. I assume that this building is built strongly enough that the ceiling won't fall down on me. Now these are assumptions which may or may not be justified. But I must make these assumptions in order to move at all. On the other hand, in order to keep alive, in order to become a human being really, one has got to question everything.
Everyone had always said that John would be a preacher when he grew up, just like his father. It had been said so often that John, without ever thinking about it, had come to believe it himself. Not until the morning of his 14th birthday did he really begin to think about it, and by then it was already too late. His earliest memories, which were in a way his only memories, were of the hurry and brightness of Sunday mornings. They all rose together on that day, his father, who did not have to go to work, and led them in prayer before breakfast. His mother, who dressed up on that day and looked almost young, with her hair straightened, and on her head the close-fitting white cap that was the uniform of holy women. His younger brother, Roy, who was silent that day because his father was home. And Sarah, who wore red ribbon in her hair that day and was fondled by her father. And the baby, Ruth, who was dressed in pink and white and rolled in her mother's arms to church. The church was not very far away, 4 blocks up Lenox Avenue, on a corner not far from the hospital. It was to this hospital that his mother had gone when Roy and Sarah and Ruth were born. John did not remember very clearly the first time she had gone to have Roy. Folks said that he had cried and carried on the whole time his mother was away. He remembered only enough to be afraid every time her belly began to swell, knowing that each time the swelling began, it would not end until she was taken from him to come back with a stranger. Each time this happened, she became a little more of a stranger herself. She would soon be going away again, Roy said. He knew much more about such things than John. John had observed his mother's closely, seeing no swelling yet, but his father had prayed one morning for the little voyager soon to be among them. And so John knew that Roy spoke the truth. Every Sunday morning, then, since John could remember, they had taken to the streets, the Grimes family, on their way to church. Sinners along the avenue watched them, men still wearing their Saturday night clothes, wrinkled and dusty now, muddy-eyed and muddy-faced, and women with harsh voices and tight, bright dresses, cigarettes between their fingers or held tightly in the corners of their mouths. They talked and laughed and fought together, and the women fought like men. John and Roy, passing these women and men, looked at one another briefly, John embarrassed and Roy amused. Roy would be like them when he grew up, if the Lord did not change his heart. These men and women they passed on Sunday mornings had spent the night in bars or in cat houses or on the streets or on rooftops or under the stairs. They had been drinking. They had gone from cursing to laughter to anger and to lust. Once he and Roy had watched a man and a woman in the basement of a condemned house. They did it standing up. The woman had wanted 50 cents. The man had flashed a razor. John had never watched again. He had been afraid, but Roy had watched them many times, and he told John he had done it with some girls down the block. And his mother and father, who went to church on Sundays, they did it too. And sometimes John heard them in the bedroom behind him over the sound of rats' feet and rat screams and the music of cursing from the harlot's house downstairs. Their church was called the Temple of the Fire Baptized. It was not the biggest church in Harlem, nor yet the smallest, but John had been brought up to believe it was the holiest and best. His father was head deacon in this church. And there were only two, the other a round black man named Deacon Breathwaite, and he took up the collection and sometimes he preached. The pastor, Father James, was a genial, well-fed man with a face like a darker moon. It was he who preached on Pentecost Sundays and led revivals in the summertime and anointed and healed the sick.
In this program is Amiri Baraka, who was writing during this period as LeRoi Jones. Here's an audio where he reads his poem, Mise en Scène, Newark, 1947, and we'll end our readings with a poem he wrote in 1959, preface to a 20-volume suicide note.
It's an old poem. It was a poem that I wrote when I was very young. I didn't know it was a poem. I was scribbling it on the back of an envelope in a Chinese restaurant. It's called Mise en Scène, Newark, 1947. Green swirling neon snow, fish shack closing. A Chinaman leans in the flour. Another recaps empty soda bottles. Fish shack closing. 4 o'clock Negroes sleep or nod or hug the tables. 26 cents rung on the register, a pack of Luckies. The vomiting band leader looks out wearily from the phone booth. He is with a white woman whose parents do not know where she is.
Preface to a 20-volume suicide note, 1959. Lately, I've become accustomed to the way the ground opens up and envelops me each time I go out to walk the dog, or the broad-edged silly music the wind makes when I run for the bus. Things have come to that. And now, each night I count the stars, and each night I get the same number. And when they will not come to be counted, count the holes they leave. Nobody sings anymore. And then last night, I tiptoed up to my daughter's room and heard her talking to someone. And when I opened the door, there was no one there, only she on her knees, peeking into her own clasped hands.
Thank you all for joining us in this exploration of the works of African-American writers from the period 1900 to 1959. I hope you enjoyed it. We enjoyed putting it together for you. And I hope it has encouraged you to read or reread these great American writers. In just a minute or two, we're going to begin the Q&A, but I did want to take just a moment to thank everyone involved in this incredible program. First, our wonderful actors, Geoffrey D. Williams and Shontelle Thrash, and all the people who are working on the content and behind the scenes Farah Griffin, Sarah Holliday, Adrian Ingram, Jenny Lawrence, Lynn Carey Maida, and Maria Luisa Munda. Thank you all so much. And I would also like to acknowledge the generous support of the Florence Gould Foundation. This was the third in our series of 4 online programs exploring the works of African American writers over the centuries. Our next program will investigate the works from 1960 to the present day. So I hope you will join us for that. And also, I'm excited to announce that at the end of April, we will be opening our new exhibition, Black Literature Matters, in the Peluso Family Exhibition Gallery here at the library, co-curated by Dr. Griffin and our own head of exhibitions, Harriet Shapiro. That show will feature rare books and items from our special collections. Like the 2 previous programs, we have drawn extensively from the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, 3rd edition, and the insights of its editors, Henry Louis Gates Jr. and Valerie A. Smith. Thank you again for joining us, and I am going to ask Dr. Griffin to come back on screen and Maria Luisa.
Hello. One of the questions that we have here tonight is for Dr. Griffin. Who are some pioneering librarians that were involved during this time? Regina Anderson comes to mind.
Well, yes, definitely Regina Anderson, but I would also say Dorothy Porter Wesley at Howard University, who really challenged and kind of revised the classification system that was created by Dewey, the Dewey Decimal System, and showed the kind of racist underpinnings of the Dewey Decimal System. And Jean Blackwell Hudson, Miss Jean Blackwell Hudson, who was the director of the Schomburg for quite some time, and someone like a poet like Sonia Sanchez, who we might meet in the next iteration of this program, credits Miss Blackwell Hudson for having her read in Black history and Black literature. And she was very close friends with Langston Hughes and got him to donate his papers to the Schomburg. So those are some of the librarians in addition to Regina Anderson.
Actually, since it almost feels as if we don't hear much about these figures. So that's really exciting. Thank you.
Yeah. I hope we will hear more. In our exhibition that's coming up, we have a whole panel devoted to some of those pioneering librarians.
Oh, it's so exciting. This is a question for the performers. Although all the figures we have presented are so significant to transformation and great change, which voice spoke to you the most?
At some point, all of the writers speak to a certain part of us. You know, I think because of the universality of Lorraine Hansberry's words and the circumstances of their plight, it seems a little more immediate to me in terms of being able to access that. Yeah, so I would have to say Lorraine Hansberry, but also a lot of the other authors, because they're very, very juicy little bits that say, you know, exactly what I'm feeling. And I apologize, my camera's not working. I wish I could have been on screen with you guys, but yeah, that's my answer. Shontelle, take it away.
Well, I would say it's really difficult for me to pinpoint one person because we've been able to discover and read and have the pleasure to read so many, you know, worthy artists here. So I actually really, because if I started to name them, I probably would name about 10 or 20 of them. So I will say that it has been such a joy just discovering these voices that are new to me, but not new to others, but probably are new to some of the audience members as well. So I would say a number of them and how pioneering they were. Lorraine Hansberry is always like a top one for me, but I mean, I can name probably 20 more easily. So I am not really going to answer that question because there are so many of them.
Agreed. While I know for a fact, based on all these comments, and as well as our previous events for the program, that both of your performances have been marvelous. That the figures, which is, I hope it's slightly strange thing to say, it's almost as if hearing these voices again, or at least knowing their presence. So you're both marvelous.
Oh, thank you.
And you also, with the recordings, even though we have recordings of, for example, James Baldwin, although we have his voice, for example, you both just have this refreshing, empowering spin. So thank you both.
Hey, thank you
very much. And I will actually go off camera for this one because it's for whoever wants to answer. So Carolyn, if you want to return to the screen. So this is a question who wants to answer. What is your advice on building an inclusive community?
Desire to do so, right? Setting that as a goal. I mean, I think that so rarely do we actually set that as a goal. And then realizing that when you want to invite people into a community, there has to be a reason for them to want to be there and a reason for them to feel welcome. And so that it might require a bit of change on our part, change for the better. So I would say those two things. One, the desire to want that community, and then a willingness to help create, sustain, and welcome new and different perspectives into it.
Yeah, I can't say it any differently. It's the intentionality. It's wanting to do it and then setting a path to do it, and listening. Making sure you understand. I think we're all learning, I think we're all learning, and we have to learn from each other and listen. And, it's not I don't know, there's not an end result. This is a path we're on that, we need to keep at it. And that's exciting. I think that's a good process to begin to, to talk about and to bring more voices into our environments, whether it be our staff or our collections or our presenters or our events. There's just so much work that we can do, and it's exciting. It's exciting work to bring all of these voices together.
Truly astonishing and breathtaking to see people coming together to heal, grow, learn, and listen from each other. So I'm looking forward to great changes, and we're seeing it now despite what's been happening. So thank you both so much. And I want to say thank you everyone for your questions, for attending the event. I hope you stay safe and see you for the next time.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Maria Luisa.
Yes, thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.